there are many legendary paladins in Warcraft. Uther the Lightbringer, Tirion, Alexandros Mograine, Bolvar Fordragon. But few of them carry a story as painful, as human, and as important as Tirion Fordring. Tirion was not simply the holy warrior who appeared at the end of the Lich King's story and shattered Frostmourne. He was a man shaped by war, honor, exile, loss, and faith. He fought the Horde when the Horde was one of the greatest threats the human kingdoms had ever faced. He had every reason to hate orcs, and yet, when the time came, Tirion chose honor over hatred. That choice destroyed his old life, but it also made him the man who would one day stand before Arthas Menethil, wield the Ashbringer, and break the blade that had stolen countless souls. Before Tirion became Highlord of the Argent Crusade, before he carried the Ashbringer, and long before he stood at the frozen throne, he was a warrior of Lordaeron. He earned his place through courage, discipline, zeal, and honor. At only 18 years old, he was knighted, and he served his kingdom with fierce loyalty. In time, Tirion found his faith and drew closer to the Church of the Holy Light, studying under Archbishop Alonzus Faol. And when the Second War began, when the Horde threatened the kingdoms of men, Faol helped create something new. The world needed more than priests. It needed more than knights. It needed warriors who could fight with steel, heal with faith, and lead by example. And so, the Order of the Silver Hand was born. Tirion stood among the first Paladins, alongside Uther the Lightbringer, Tirion, Saidan Dathrohan, and Gavinrad the Dire. They were not meant to be simple weapons. They were meant to be symbols of hope in a war that had already consumed kingdoms. During the Second War, Tirion marched with the alliance of Lordaeron against the Horde. He fought on brutal battlefields, and during the siege of Blackrock Spire, he even saved Alexandros Mograine from an ogre that was about to strike him down. That detail matters, because Tirion did not judge orcs from a distance. He fought them. He saw the consequences of their invasion. He lived through a war where orcs were not just another political faction, but the enemy at the gates. And that is what makes the next part of his story so powerful. After the war, Tirion became Lord of Martenhold Keep and Governor of Hearthglen. For a time, he lived the life of a respected noble and a just ruler. He had a wife, Karandra, a son, Taelan, land, honor, and a future. But despite his military fame, Tirion was not hungry for more war. He had seen enough bloodshed. For a moment, it seemed as if the old warrior had earned peace. Then he encountered an old orc hermit living in an abandoned tower. The two clashed, but during the battle, part of the ruined tower collapsed. Tirion was knocked unconscious and badly wounded. He woke days later and realized the truth. The orc had saved him. Tirion returned to the tower, not as a conqueror, but as a man searching for answers. And there he discovered something he had not expected to find. Eitrigg was not a demon-crazed monster. He was old, weary, and honorable. He told Tirion of the orcs before their corruption, of a society once rooted in shamanism, and of why he had left the Horde behind after seeing what it had become. In Eitrigg, Tirion saw honor, not alliance honor, not Horde honor, true honor. Tirion had fought the Horde. He knew what the war had cost. But he also understood something many others could not accept. An enemy can still possess honor. And if a paladin cannot recognize truth when it stands before him, then what is his faith worth? Tirion promised to keep Eitrigg's existence secret. But Bartholus, Tyrion's ambitious second, was suspicious. He called in Lord Commander Saidan Dathrohan, and soon Eitrigg was hunted down. When Tirion saw Alliance soldiers move against the old orc, he made the choice that would destroy his life. He stood against his own side. Not because he had forgotten the war, but because he had given his word, because Eitrigg had saved his life, and because honor demanded it. Tirion was brought to Strathholm to stand trial. His wife pleaded with him. His friends urged him to say what the court wanted to hear. He could have lied and saved himself, but Tirion wanted to be an example to his son, so he told the truth. The verdict was devastating. Tirion had raised his weapon against Alliance soldiers. For that, he could no longer remain a knight of the Silver Hand. Uther the Lightbringer himself stripped Tirion of his place in the Order. Tirion lost his title, his home, his honor, and the life he had built. He was sent into exile. But Tirion did not fall because he abandoned the light. He fell because he followed it further than the men judging him were willing to go. Years passed. The world grew darker. The scourge rose. The Third War shattered kingdoms. The Silver Hand was broken. Lordaeron became a land of plague, death, and ghosts. And Tirion lived in seclusion near the Thondroral River in the eastern Plaguelands. When adventurers first met him there, he did not reveal himself immediately. He appeared as an old hermit, accompanied by his horse, Mirador. Only after he judged them to be people of integrity did he reveal who he truly was. And then he revealed his deepest wound. His son, Taelan Fordring, had taken his place as Lord of Mardenhold, but Taelan had also joined the Scarlet Crusade, and had become one of its Highlords. For Tirion, this was almost unbearable. The Scarlet Crusade claimed to serve the light and fight the undead. But beneath its holy words and righteous banners, it was rotting from within. Paranoia, fanaticism, hatred, cruelty. It was everything Tirion feared the light could become when separated from mercy and wisdom. And now his son was trapped inside it. Tirion believed there was still something noble in Taelan, something worth saving. So he did not simply ask adventurers to kill Scarlet soldiers, he asked them to help Taelan remember who he was. They recovered pieces of his past, Taelan's hammer, and a painting from Caer Darrow, showing Tirion, Karandra, and Taelan in a happier time, before exile, before plague, before the world broke around them. With the help of Miranda, Tyrion's old advisor and an illusionist of Lordaeron, the adventurers infiltrated Hearthglen and delivered Tyrion's gift to Taelan. And for one brief moment, hope returned. Taelan remembered. He saw what the Scarlet Crusade had become. He wanted to reunite with his father. But Warcraft rarely gives its heroes clean victories. The betrayal was discovered. Grand Inquisitor Asilian and the Scarlet Crusade moved to stop him. Tirion rushed to Hearthglen, but he arrived too late. The old exile who had already lost his title, his order, his home, and his old life, now lost his son. In that moment, something changed. Not into hatred, but into purpose. Over his son's body, Tirion vowed that the death of Taelan Fordring would not pass without consequence. The old order would be reborn. The true ideals of the Silver Hand would rise again. From that day onward, Tirion was no longer merely an exile. He became a High Lord again in spirit. And the world would soon need him. Before the war against the Lich King truly began, Arthas moved to eliminate Tirion before he could become a rallying figure against the Scourge. At Light's Hope Chapel, the Lich King sent Darion Mograine, the Death Knights of Acheris, and a massive undead force against the Argent Dawn. But the attack was not only about winning a battle. Arthas was using his own Death Knights as tools, willing to sacrifice them if it meant drawing Tirion Fordring out. That was always how the Lich King thought. People were weapons. The living could be broken, the dead could be raised. Champions could be turned into servants. But at Light's Hope, Arthas misjudged the power of memory, honor, and the light. Tirion appeared to defend the chapel. Alongside the Argent Dawn and the remaining Knights of the Silver Hand, he unleashed holy fury against the undead assault. For the first time, the Death Knights knew defeat. Then Tirion confronted Darion Mograine. He reminded him of what he had become, and of what his father, Alexandros Mograine, had fought against. As the truth unfolded, Darion realized he and the Death Knights had been used by the Lich King. Then Arthas himself appeared. The Lich King incapacitated Tirion and the Death Knights. He turned his dark power against Tirion. Frostmourne began to drain the old Paladin's soul. For a moment, it seemed like Arthas had won. But Tirion resisted just enough. He threw the corrupted Ashbringer to Tirion. And Tirion Fordring called upon the light. In a blinding flash, the corruption was burned away. The Ashbringer was purified. The blade that had once been stained by tragedy became holy again. Tirion charged. And Arthas retreated. Not because he had suddenly become weak, but because he understood the danger. On the holy ground of Light's Hope Chapel, against Tirion Fordring and the restored Ashbringer, even the Lich King would not risk everything. After the battle, Tirion understood that the old divisions could not hold. The Scourge would not be defeated by broken orders and divided powers. So Tirion called for a union. The Argent Dawn and the true remnants of the Silver Hand became one force. The Argent Crusade was born, not an army for the Alliance, not an army for the Horde, an army for Azeroth. And its purpose was clear. The Lich King had to fall. When the war moved to Northrend, Tirion understood that victory would require more than holy speeches and brave soldiers. He wrote to King Varian Rin and Warchief Thrall, asking them to accept the aid of the freed Death Knights of Icarus, now the Knights of the Ebon Blade, under Tirion Mograine. He even asked, if possible, that Eitrigg join him in Northrend. The orc he once defended at the cost of his entire life was still his friend. When Tirion himself came to Northrend, he did not arrive with loud banners at first. To avoid the Lich King's agents, he traveled anonymously, disguised as a simple cleric of the Crusade, and reached Valgard in the Howling Fjord. But once he was safely there, he revealed himself and reclaimed the Ashbringer. The disguise was only for the journey. The Argent Crusade had arrived. The campaign in Icecrown was brutal. Tirion advanced from Crystalsong Forest into the outskirts of Icecrown, establishing the Argent Vanguard and pushing toward Scourgeholm. But Arthas reacted quickly. The Scourge adapted. Every advance came at a cost. Tirion Mograine, disguised as the Ebon Watcher, warned Tirion that the Lich King was not like any enemy he had faced before. Arthas had no moral limits. He would use any weapon, any corpse, any cruelty. Tirion believed Tyrion's honor would become a chain, but Tirion refused to accept victory at any cost. He would not become the monster he was trying to destroy. Even in this brutal campaign, Tirion refused to forget the souls of his soldiers. To him, this war was not only about territory or victory, it was about souls. As the final assault on Icecrown Citadel came closer, Tirion feared that a massive attack from the Alliance and Horde was exactly what the Lich King wanted. Every soldier who died could become another servant of the Scourge. Every fallen champion could become another monster standing at Arthas's side. So Tirion chose a different strategy. Not an endless army thrown into the jaws of death. A small, surgical force. The strongest champions Azeroth could offer. To find them, he created the Argent Tournament. On the surface, it looked like a grand contest. Banners, trials, spectators, champions of the Alliance and Horde proving their strength. But beneath that spectacle was a clear military purpose. Tirion was testing the warriors who might one day march into Icecrown Citadel itself. The tension between Horde and Alliance was never far away. Garrosh saw the tournament as a waste of time. Varian did not trust the Horde. But Tirion understood something many others did not want to hear. They could not defeat the Scourge while still fighting each other. The trials became more dangerous than any simple tournament. Champions faced the beasts of Northrend, rival champions, and the Valkyr, powerful lieutenants of the Scourge. Then the Lich King himself appeared in the Colosseum. Tirion challenged him, but Arthas had one more move. He shattered the ground beneath the champions and sent them into the depths below, where they faced a Nubarak, the fallen Nerubian king now bound to the Scourge. When the champions survived even that, Tirion had his answer. He had found the chosen few. And with Tirion Mograine and the Knights of the Ebon Blade joining them under the banner of the Ashen Verdict, the final judgment of the Lich King began. The Ashen Verdict was more than a military alliance. It was the perfect expression of Tyrion's entire life. Paladins and Death Knights, the living and the undead, the light and those who had once served darkness, standing together against Arthas. The same man who had once been condemned for defending an honorable orc now stood beside former servants of the Lich King, because Tirion judged people by what they chose, not only by what they had been. When the attack on Icecrown Citadel began, Tirion ordered his siege rams to break the gates of the Lich King's fortress. The hour of justice had come. Inside the citadel, the Ashen Verdict established Light's hammer in the entrance hall. Tirion spoke to the champions and prepared them for the greatest battle of their lives. As the champions climbed through Icecrown Citadel, they faced the Lich King's mightiest servants. Tirion did not need to stand beside them in every hallway for his presence to matter. This was his campaign, his judgment, his answer to everything Arthas represented. And throughout the citadel, the champions saw what the Lich King did to heroes. Deathbringer Sorfang was one of the most painful examples. A son, a warrior, a fallen hero, turned into a weapon. At last, Tirion and the champions reached the frozen throne. There stood Arthas Menethil, the fallen prince, the butcher of Lordaeron. The Lich King. Tirion declared that Arthas would answer for the thousands he had slain. The final battle began, and for a time, it seemed as if the champions of Azeroth might actually prevail. But Arthas had never truly intended to merely defeat them in combat. He had been waiting for this. He wanted Tirion to bring him Azeroth's greatest heroes. Because once they fell, he would raise them, not as soldiers, as masters of the Scourge. Tirion was trapped in a block of ice, forced to watch as the Lich King overwhelmed the champions. The heroes fell. Frostmourne had claimed victory. Arthas began to raise them as his greatest servants. At that moment, everything seemed lost. But Tirion Fordring had not survived war, exile, shame, loss, and despair to break at the final moment. He called upon the light. One final blessing. One final act of faith. And the light answered. Tirion shattered the ice around him. He raised the Ashbringer. And with one strike, he broke Frostmourne. The blade that had enslaved souls for years was shattered by the blade that had been purified through the light. When Frostmourne broke, the souls trapped within were released. The spirit of King Tyrion's Menethil restored the fallen champions, and together they finished what Tirion had made possible. Arthas Menethil, the Lich King, was defeated. But the ending was not clean. As Arthas died in his father's arms, the world still faced one terrible truth. Without a Lich King, the Scourge would run wild. A mindless army of undead would pour across Azeroth, without control, without restraint, without purpose beyond destruction. There had to be a jailer. There had to be someone to hold the damned in check. There must always be a Lich King. Tirion understood the burden immediately. He took up the helm of domination and prepared to sacrifice himself. This was the same man who lost everything rather than betray his word. But before he could place the helm upon his head, Bolvar Fordragon stopped him. Burned, broken, and changed forever, Bolvar sat upon the frozen throne and told Tirion that the world still needed him and the champions who had survived. Bolvar would take the burden, not as a conqueror, not as Arthas had done, but as a jailer, as the one who would keep the Scourge contained. Tirion resisted at first, but in the end, he accepted the sacrifice. He placed the helm of domination upon Bolvar Fordragon's head. And the new Lich King was born. The world would be told that the Lich King was dead, but Tirion knew the truth. Arthas was dead. Frostmourne was broken. The reign of terror had ended. But the Scourge remained, chained only by the will of the new jailer on the frozen throne. That is where Tirion Fordring's greatest chapter ends. Not with a perfect victory, but with sacrifice, secrecy, and the heavy price of saving the world. Tirion Fordring's story is powerful because he was never just the strongest paladin in the room. War tested his courage. Eitrigg tested his honor. Exile tested his faith. Taelan tested his heart. The Scarlet Crusade tested his understanding of the light. Lordaeron and the Death Knights tested his mercy. The Lich King tested his resolve. That is why Tirion Fordring was worthy of the Ashbringer, not because he was flawless, but because suffering never turned him into the thing he hated. In the end, when Frostmourne rose over the fallen champions of Azeroth, it was Tirion Fordring who called upon the light, broke free, and shattered the blade of the Lich King, not with hatred, not with vengeance, but with honor. And that is the legacy of Tirion Fordring. Tirion Fordring is one of Chris Metzen's finest Warcraft characters, because he represents everything a true paladin should be. Not blind obedience, not fanaticism, not hatred hidden behind holy words, but honor, sacrifice, mercy, courage, and the strength to choose the harder path, even when it costs everything. If you enjoyed this story, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments which Warcraft character you want to see next. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.